Sweet. So, all right, everyone. I'm here with Chris. How do you pronounce your last name? Cullinane?
Cullinane. Yeah, it's a little bit
Cullinane.
weird.
Cool. So, Chris is. Are you an educator currently? I know you've worked in education, just kind of based on emails we sent back and forth. Or
Yeah, not currently, but I
okay,
have been a substitute teacher here in Alaska, private tutoring as well before that through various things. But yeah.
nice. Yeah, and so Chris and I have this shared. We're both well. He's in Anchorage right now, and I was born in Anchorage, so small world. And real quick, I'd actually like to talk a little bit more about Anchorage because when I went back as an adult, I was surprised by. I mean, things you don't see as a kid are. Um, I mean, I went back in February. I don't know why I chose to go back in February because it's still
Yeah.
relatively, it's a relative sausage fest still in February. And like, I mean, that's the thing about the city is there's just is so many men compared to women, which is something that
Yeah.
was shocking to me. Um, I mean, I had a great time, but it was just kind of interesting things you don't recognize when you come back to a place. Like it definitely had a lot more poverty than I ever witnessed and understood
Mm,
really as a kid. I don't know if
yep.
if you kind of um, see that from your perspective now, but that was something that really stood out to me. It was just a lot. I feel really bad for the native communities, especially because they seem hit the hardest by it.
Yeah. No. And it's been eye-opening. There's been so many things that I've learned slowly, and there's been so many things that I actually had. It has taken me the time to reflect on them, to really realize how powerful they sort of were.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a really a kind of a unique experience. I went to a kind of standard Christian private elementary school, but then I went to Athenaeum for high school,
Mm-hmm.
which unfortunately no longer exists, but was a really kind of unique school with some unique access to a little bit more of Alaska than most kids get to experience
Right.
from a school setting.
Totally.
Um, but I think in particular, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially in regards to um, natives in Alaska, is sort of the two competing versions of life, right? Because there's a version of native life which is actually very healthy. It can survive on its own. It doesn't really need anything else. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's the intermediate zone,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's Anchorage. And it's
Right.
really in the intermediate zone where the chaos happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and all sorts of things like you run into alcohol has not been interacting with their genetics in the same way that it has with Western
Yeah,
genetics
right. I
for
mean, real quick, just to
yeah.
piggyback off that, I remember because I mean, I had a whole lot of time. I was staying with a family friend, but I kind of had a whole lot of time to just go, and a lot of it was just kind of, going to like Diamond Arrow, going to Lucky
Mm,
Wishbone, going to all these places that I remember as a kid,
yeah.
and just walking around Anchorage. And I remember one day, um, I was walking past the mural. There's a big mural with a whale, or a ton of
Mm,
whales, and there was just kind of it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday, and there were um, a lot of native dudes just jamming out. And I remember just stopping, and they were just passing around a giant handle of vodka, and they're like, "Hey man, you want to hang out with us and drink?" And I said, "You know what? I guess I mean technically I'm on vacation, so and this is prior to COVID, I was willing to
yeah.
share a drink with strangers." And yeah, I just
The
said,
good old days.
yeah, fuck it. Yeah, it was
That's
a lot
awesome.
of fun, but it was really it's not something that yeah, going off of what you were saying is it's pretty tragic just how something like genetics really can play such a huge role in an entire community's life in that way.
Mhm. Yeah. It's and I want to give the other side of that story with a
Hmm.
quick thing on, I actually had an experience. I was riding my bike to school in the winter when I was younger. And there I saw a dead man in the snow.
Wow.
Um, he'd gotten pretty cold. He was dead. Even he was dead when I found him.
Hmm.
But yeah, he'd been drinking Listerine. because at the time it had alcohol in it. And yeah, so I want to talk about the other side of the story. So
Totally.
there's genetics, and there are huge problems with things like this. And alcohol is one version of the story, and we can talk about the beautiful American Samoan people
Right.
and what happens with dietary things as they
Right.
switch
Yeah.
from a diet that is very efficient to one that has loads of excess carbs and
And
excess sugars.
and to just kind of for people to um, get some context, and I was actually curious about this the other day too, because I was trying to figure out COVID deaths in relation to obesity, and just to
Mm,
kind of just do my own research. And I was so surprised that I think it was the top 10 or 12, I mean, an overwhelming majority of the countries, the top countries who had the largest obese populations, I'm talking like 50%, 60%,
yeah.
were these Pacific Islander nations: Fiji, American Samoa, Hawaii. A lot of the native Hawaiian population is very overweight, and I didn't actually dig into why that was. So maybe would you like to continue kind of expanding on that a little bit, or?
For sure, and I'm certainly no expert on this,
Yeah, yeah,
but the idea that our economy is set up to work with some things at scale and some things at not, and that means that the cost effectiveness of certain decisions when you're back on the consumer end means that certain cereals and various things that according to nature have always been expensive for us as human beings to get: fat,
right.
sugar,
Mhm.
these things that we crave at a biological level. We've made those cheap. And in the same way that we can talk about the sort of the relative newness in the mix of genetics, this also leads into a way of saying there's a way of talking about this as the stories that really bind a community together.
Mhm.
What kind of stories make sense? And so one of the great things about a big, open, huge democracy that believes in the freedom of the individual is that so many stories can be told, so
Right.
many unique and interesting stories. On the
Mhm.
other side of that, on the tribal, small scale, it's this sort of oneness of the story
Mhm.
that really allows for the individuals to live while also surviving. And so
Right.
it's sort of the two sides of this scale. We
Right.
haven't even solved the hunger problem, but
No,
we're already running up against the other side. So
totally.
we're dealing with a different kind of issue here. And so
Yeah.
the there are so many beautiful things that we could come to learn, under just respect and understand if we took the time to really appreciate them from a different perspective.
Mhm.
So one of the things I like to think about is the idea of elders at the end of their life, if they can't support themselves and they can't if they and they've told all their stories, it's sort of, there's two conditions, right? You can no longer provide for yourself and you've told all the stories.
Mhm.
So you're not, with you leaving, this everything gets to continue. So
Right.
that's sort of the building block for this. So but one of the things that can happen because of how harsh nature can be is the need for um the right sacrifice.
Mhm.
And the right sacrifice at the right time can mean these elders taking it upon themselves to walk off into the night or onto the ice floe or whatever,
Mhm.
such that the stories and that the next people can survive because it's not their time. But that has to do with this idea of rejoining the great raven in the sky, and I mean so many more things that are half mythological, in
Right.
this weird world.
Right.
Um, but at its core, they're still human beings. They can still
Mhm.
think. They can still they're making rational decisions. And when you're trying to move from a story that was so simple
Right.
outwards, that has all this sort of like, why would I do that? Why would I,
Totally. Well,
why would
and
I
the
help this person next door just because they're, puking their guts out or broke or homeless? That's
and
just.
then through American history, I mean, there's been this constant, I mean, constant struggle. It's embedded into our history of these conflicting stories. And I
Mm,
mean, just think of what like something like the idea of manifest destiny did to so many different cultures and tribes throughout the country who, they this isn't what they didn't want to cede their land to entire groups of people. And yet at that, there's a moment where two groups of people, and I mean, I saw this in Alaska as a kid and just growing up and having native friends too, where there's this there's this kind of gray area between the old world where everything that your family and the generations of your family before had known to be completely true and still are true in a lot of ways are confronted with this entirely new paradigm of, okay, this is the new world and you're in it now, you're in our world now.
mm,
I mean, you see that too, like I know Alaska has a lot of native communities that have chosen to say, okay, look, we are going to, we are far out in the middle of nowhere, these are our rules for our community to preserve these things. um,
mhm.
and of course I think that's kind of what I took from what you were saying. It's a luxury to not have to confront, to be in that gray area really as a human being,
Yeah.
I mean, and it's such a, just in terms of, I mean, people think of like, okay, you think of like Alaska, right? It's a huge landmass. It's not one culture. I mean, it's dozens, if not over 50, 60 different cultures, probably different languages, different creation stories. um, and those are all at risk of dying really,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, even the inter-native conflict is still
Hmm.
much more alive today than the sort of lower 48 indigenous peoples sort
Hmm.
of inter-conflict,
Has.
because of how alive much of ours is. But it
Hmm.
still can sort of degrade, and I want to mention this sort of process as a
Right.
way of talking about how these things can sort of happen. So you don't realize, as something is getting smaller, ticking down by one, how that could eventually cause a large explosion.
Hmm.
But all it takes so imagine here's one system inside of several systems. It's the school system inside of the village system. They can't afford to put a school in every village. Some of the kids have to snow machine in. And I
Hmm.
mean,
Literally, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, it's kind of cool thinking about, being 7 years old riding a snow machine to school until you realize that's every day.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
It,
it's not really for everybody. But
hmm.
what happens is one family moves away, some kids age out, not enough kids age back in. The system trickles away. But what eventually happens is that particular school loses its minimum threshold number of students. And then, because of the arbitrary rules of
No
from
more
some
fun.
system that's 100 miles away, they
Hmm.
lose their funding. That
Right.
school disappears. Then all of those kids now have to travel from further to go to a different school.
And
And
there
they
aren't
start to
resources. It's not like there's a local charter school that's there to fill the void or any other really option in that sense.
yeah, and so it's sort of it's so wonderful for all of the sort of things that we care about in the rest of the country to have a vibrant market which allows for enough um, movement, and there's a suspension in it that allows for everything to not be so dramatic. But
Hmm.
because of these systems are at the edge, they're literally at the edge, because that's the school that disappears because there's no
Right.
funding. It's
Right.
not in Anchorage. Anchorage isn't having these
Right.
problems. The people flow is closer to Anchorage.
Right.
So it it trickles until it becomes a stream, and then it's too late. You can't
Right.
reverse that many systems.
Well, and then of course you have people that are forced then to make a choice. You know,
Yeah.
if hypothetically speaking, you could have a school in a native community that was outside of, and I mean, Alaska's huge. I mean, you have communities that are 100 miles away from the nearest other community, and, things have to get flown in literally. So as soon as when you lose something like that, or it becomes a community full of, 40, 50, 60 year olds and no kids want to stay there, or there's no reason to, naturally there's a migration and a flow into bigger cities. And, there's all sorts of social problems in bigger cities, and especially a city like Anchorage, where, Anchorage is beautiful. Don't get me wrong. I love it. I was born there. But even things like the seasonal workflow and how that
Yeah.
relates to, I mean, it's really cold. And during the winter, it's a lot of men who aren't working because their job is suspended basically until it's warm enough. And, you see this in Slavic, like Russia is a great example, huge rates of alcoholism and things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a really complicated problem. Absolutely.
Yeah. For sure, not easy to solve at all.
No.
And I think people should take a look seriously at how Alaska's PFD works, how how it actually
And could
began.
you PFD for people who
Yeah.
may not know?
So permanent fund dividend. The joke is from the Simpsons, where they drive in and the man at the gate pays him $2,000 to let the oil companies rape and pillage the land. Close enough.
Yeah.
It starts with the idea that in the Alaska State Constitution we actually have in there that the resources of Alaska belong to Alaskans.
Mhm.
And what that does is, if the oil companies are going to come in and extract the oil, they have to pay us tax, because that thing that they're taking out belongs to us, and so
Mhm.
they have to repay us. And so this gets put into a large pot. That pot gets invested. The interest off the investment gets basically passed out every year. Can be as low as less than 1,000, maybe 700,
Mhm.
maybe up to $3,000.
And remind me again, is it dependent on family size and
Um,
socioeconomic status to some degree?
so it's so because of, and this is kind of the back and forth of this, because it's the resources of Alaska belong to Alaskans.
Mhm.
It's everyone. If you're a citizen of Alaska,
Mhm.
you've been there for a couple years, I think. I can't remember what they actually put it at. They've recently changed it to try and make sure that people aren't like keeping a small property up here and living the rest of their time in California or something like that.
Totally.
But the idea being that if you're living up here, here's some money um, every year for the basically bec- because of this pure principle. So it's not, you have to apply for it, but it's not like it's based off of anything. It's just if you got 5 kids and 2 adults, then you apply for 5 kids and 2 adults, and you would get that much. So.
Right. Yeah, I know for my family when we were there, that was a pretty big incentive.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, the cost of living when we were there too was so low. It was a little bit shocking coming from Alaska down to California, and I mean,
Mhm.
it's only gotten worse. So I have a question regarding just kind of, um, I mean, the state of COVID and politics, and I mean, probably in the most locked down state, I guess you could say, one of the most. Is it like how is the COVID situation um, perceived and being treated? Because one thing about Alaska that is it's a blessing and a curse is people up there are very independent. And
Mhm.
so I'm just curious about what your perception is in regards to that whole situation.
Even our lefties are
Totally.
relatively libertarian,
And they're like Rand
and
Paul
even the
lefties.
yeah, and the righties aren't nearly as sort of like control everything. So
Yeah.
it really is not as authoritarian.
No.
That all of our authoritarian aspects we import via the extra bad ideas that come from basically federal things
Mm-hmm.
onto us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess I want to tie this a little bit back to the PFD UBI thing, because there's this whole mix. I think so I think the PFD with also, if you look at the native hospital here in Alaska, which basically means that natives in Alaska, because of the contracts between, I believe it's between the native corporations, the state, and past contracts between the state and indigenous peoples of Alaska, that basically they have free medical for everything
Mm-hmm.
with this nice, big, beautiful medical campus that's doing cool stuff. Um, but even with those two things, so many people fall through the cracks. So, like, we need to be able to look at the entire situation and go, yes, something great happened, at least I think so, in
Mm-hmm.
the native corporations that we have here,
Mm-hmm.
in their ability to steward themselves. Now, I'm not saying that they're always picking, protect the natural way.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a lot of their decisions are very modern corporate decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But there has been a relatively good attempt to at least try to have the sort of safety net that you would need. But it really shows that just trying to solve it with things like money or money or free health insurance isn't enough. It's not thinking about the totality of the solution.
It's multivariate, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, I was teaching today, and I was talking with my students about homelessness, and California's got a pretty big homeless problem,
Mhm.
for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah.
One of them being that the weather's better than most places, so a lot of homeless people congregate here. Um, but one of my students today was talking about how he knows a homeless guy who just chooses to be homeless, and he, I was kind of pushing him a little bit. I was like, okay, well, is this, he doesn't have a mental health problem, he doesn't have a drug problem. He's like, not to my knowledge. I think he just wanted to check out of society and wanted the freedom to, and I think that, of course, there are, my in my own family, my brother, he has a he's had a drug addiction problem in the past, and he's been homeless. And um, what is really striking to me is when you get put in the system, or you are arrested for something like a drug problem, and you have a felony mark on your record now, or even a misdemeanor, it is almost impossible to get an entry level job in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
and especially in a job market that's pretty scarce. And so, naturally, people tend to gravitate towards what I would call like hustle kind of side stuff, so
Mhm.
they'll get in touch with a friend who's maybe selling this, or maybe he wants to move. There's a huge, like there is in Alaska, there's a huge weed culture in a lot of ways
Mhm.
down here. And a lot of people just kind of get sucked up in that, and next thing they know, it's like they're making money that it's either cash or it's untraceable. And so it's just this, I mean, that's just one tiny aspect of it.
Yeah.
Mental
Yeah,
health.
and
Yeah.
I was just gonna say there's all sorts of things that compound onto that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it, and so this would be a really big kind of topic break, but there's this idea, right, that we've over the last several decades shifted to nearly an entirely consumer economy,
Right.
right? And so on top of that, what that means is the jobs that are available out there often have to do with selling stuff.
Right.
And that immediately puts employers into a bind, because almost all of this immediately then puts into a trust issue, because
Mm-hmm.
you're putting people in charge of product.
Right. Absolutely. There's less skills. There's less trainable skills, I would say. I mean, look, if you go back 100 years ago, or 200, I mean, 100, right? the things that are being produced on machines. Okay, hi Susie, hi John, we're going to teach you how to use this metal lathe to make this product for people to sell in the United States. As that kind of stuff has moved overseas, I mean, as globalization has worked in good ways and negative ways, we're really left with very few. I mean, the people who really know the skills, really it's digital. I mean, and very few people have that digital literacy. I mean, people like, I'm sure you're familiar with the learn to code type thing. I mean, just these kind of like, what are people going to do when, I mean, these types of information and digitally based jobs and skills seem ever more important. But I even have friends that are computers, went and got a degree in computer science, and even that's oversaturated. It's not a guarantee.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, there's and then this is where, I mean, it finally comes back to the idea of education at its core.
Right.
Because this is about preparation. It's about being ready to play the game and understanding that you play that game and you don't need to know that it's all going to work, but it's going to all work because this game is getting played.
Mm-hmm.
It is really interesting. So one of the things that's happened in my mind with education is I break up human history into 3 sections.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, before the Industrial Revolution, after the Industrial Revolution, and before the dropping of the atomic bombs to end World War II effectively,
Mm-hmm.
and then to now. So I have Eric Weinstein's sort of Great Nap period.
Mm-hmm.
I have the period that led up to the Great Nap, and then I have basically the rest of human history.
And could you real quick just get into the Great Nap? What like how would you sort of define that or summarize it?
Yeah, so the Great Nap is the idea that it is so hard for us to see
Mm-hmm.
because we are little individuals viewing from our little individual time scale. We are seeing a particular slice of the world
Mm-hmm.
at this current moment. We see for, a day every day, and it's kind of like that for 80 years, and that's it.
Right.
But at some level, it's cool that we have these 2 words, creation and destruction.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for us to be able to distinguish them. They don't have any real distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of us. We understand that I could, destroy my phone by breaking it in half, but to the rest of the universe, that's just my phone folded in half. Like,
Right.
it's really it really hasn't changed that much. At some level, sorry.
Oh, you're good.
At least sorry.
I would say, like, I mean, going kind of back to the Great Nap, it's this like, man, I forget kind of how exactly Eric Weinstein defined it, because it was very in his usual way, sort of,
Yeah.
Very kind of tongue in cheek a little bit, and I mean, on the
Yeah.
nose, but
yeah, it essentially has to do with, we could always be at war playing the game, figuring
Right.
out which country is going to win, figuring out which one of these cells has the right structure to dominate the planet.
Mm-hmm.
That's not actually a good game if you actually think about it.
Gotcha.
But that is sort of the game that countries play,
Mm-hmm.
if you let them just play.
Right. I mean, you hear this kind of a lot. It's like sort of, and it's interesting because this kind of comes down to our psychology a little bit. Like, it's kind of just this very standard far left kind of trope where it's like, why do we need to hurt each other, man? What's the point, man? And in one way, I'm maybe I'm a little bit more cynical than some people, but I really want to believe that we're capable of that. I really
Mhm.
want to believe that we're capable of not doing things selfishly, but we act in our own self-interest in the moment. I mean, we don't think about. I mean, look at how World War One started. It was over
Yeah.
some kind of trivial, you know, late 19th or early 19th century treaties that no one could have foresaw where that was going. No one could have foreseen. I
Yeah,
mean,
no
maybe
one
they
could have
could have.
actually, not like specifically, no one could have
Right.
actually seen like, oh, I think this is going to happen in a few
Right. I mean,
years, right? Yeah.
people were going out. Those first battles, there were still people. I know the French and the Germans both had horse cavalry and plumed helmets, and they were dressed in their. It was like the war of Napoleonic wars all over again, because that's just what
Mhm.
they had no idea of the technology that was going to be unleashed.
Yeah, and
Um,
everything changed very quickly.
Absolutely. And I think things are changing. And I mean, kind of going back to those, how you break things up into three chunks like that, I kind of feel like everything is accelerating. It's like we're on a treadmill that just keeps getting faster and faster.
Yeah.
And, and all we want to do is, part of us just kind of wants to get off a little bit. And I think that you see a lot of people in society kind of choosing that option because it's overwhelming. Like social media is overwhelming. We don't know that. I mean, we witness the power and destructive capability of it every day, but we can't really pull ourselves from it. Yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
strange time that we're in historically. Uh, I don't know how anyone is going to make sense of this.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And individuals trying to make sense of things, that's, I mean, it's essentially what we're doing. I mean,
Right.
it's the reason why the country is acting like it's going crazy, right? You
Hmm.
had the guy in Pennsylvania shooting those other two guys over snow.
Oh, I know. That was
Like,
brutal.
yeah, to me it's sort of like, this is if you were going to diagnose
Hmm.
societal, not psychopathy, but just like
The
society.
edge is so
Yeah.
the edge is so thin. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we really realize. Yeah, I I want to eat healthy, good food, but I will eat food to survive until I'm eating things that most, like, if you were put in the situation, you
Right.
would eat things that you wouldn't think.
I know
Human
what you're
beings are
saying.
amazing because we are capable of so much.
Right.
Sometimes that's amazing or
Yeah.
beautiful, but
Right.
sometimes it's utterly, yeah. We can survive not on the level of the cockroach, but close.
Right. Yeah.
And
Except we have the capabilities of letting things get out of hand, or having technology that enables us to cause great harm to ourselves without intending to.
yeah, yeah, without intention, we can let things slide and we can mess things up without intention, and
Hmm.
we can really not, we can pretend to not be until we need to be
Yeah.
really well, and it really is like having blinders.
Totally.
um yeah, but to kind of collapse that all in back onto education.
Hmm.
So something that happens at the beginning of the 20th century is, because of World War I and World War II, Oxford removes the Latin oral test and switches to a standardized written test. So instead of being asked live questions and having to respond in a different language, um, the test is pre-written. So not only is it not unique, but it's also, it also doesn't require any, the sort of, it's not the same thing.
Right.
So that's just at one level. There's
Hmm.
still all of the other stuff that education is, but that has also been fused with things like socializing, um, well, basically socializing, and job training. We fuse early childhood with socializing. We try to fuse late education with job training,
Hmm.
and none of those things are actually education.
Right.
N- None of those are at all education. All of
Hmm.
those things are just facts that you could learn.
Right.
to me, the key thing that is education is the ability to have the dialectic inside of inside of yourself for growth.
Hmm.
Do you have the ability to start somewhere, attempt to try and answer a question, work your way back, figure out how that's not a good question, work your way forward with a better question? Are you capable of learning for yourself, or
Hmm.
do you just keep going up and asking questions and
Right.
getting facts?
I think where education fails a lot. I mean, actually, it doesn't even fail. It just it almost completely doesn't even address it at all. Is strategies for lifelong success.
Yeah.
And I mean, one example I like is this idea that, and I don't want to paint a picture of the culture at large, but I do think there is kind of a larger thread of kind of victimization in a lot of people these days. Right, maybe rightly so in some circumstances. I mean, it's easy. I guess I would say it's easier to find sympathizers with your whatever ailment you may have as a human being, and I think social media exacerbates that. But
Yeah.
I also think that there's this idea that if you if you come into something, and I mean everyone has probably felt this, I'm sure you did when your first day substitute teaching or something like that, where it's like you it's like imposter syndrome. What am I
Mm,
doing
mm,
here? You're anxious, you're nervous. Immediately I think a lot of people, when they're in a situation like that, they want to um, kind of let their ego drive. They want to say, okay, well, here are my ideas. Here's how I'm going to do it. Here's what's going to happen. And what happens is people are going to confront those ideas because you really don't know anything. And instead of by taking an approach that's almost like, maybe not know anything, but by taking an approach that's more based on like, okay, I'm a learner no matter what. I'm going to learn from this situation and I'm going to adapt to this situation. Or I'm going to take that advice and take your ego out of it as much as you can. Because that's, I mean, in terms of lifelong success,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
to me is something that I feel is so neglected in school. Just say, look, you're going to fail multiple times. You need to
Hmm.
learn how to deal with it and to have some self-respect for yourself, you know? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
My rant,
Yeah.
my
No. No.
that's
No.
like a boomer rant, but
No. 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 You're exactly right on that front, especially when it comes to things like, hey, I'm saying this now on the podcast. I don't mind looking like an idiot on something. I
hmm,
really don't.
yeah,
Like on anything.
right.
Everything Newton said was wrong. Everything Newton said was wrong.
The three
That
laws don't
that
exist.
that cool thing, like they don't exist, not in that form, not really.
Yeah.
Like that, like he's just a pretentious dickhead who at
Mm,
the age of like 16 got challenged to the problem of um retrograde motion of Venus, I think.
I have no idea.
I can't remember which one it was. Anyway, and all he and oh, he had to invent calculus in order to solve the problem.
Right.
He had to invent his own version of the calculus because he didn't know that Leibniz had done it at the same time. So he had to invent his own version of the calculation, then writes the Principia.
Hmm.
Like, so on that level, but on the same level, like almost everything he said was stupid, but he challenged something. So
Right.
I'm willing to say stupid things because I want to have the conversation to spark the thing. Because I
Absolutely.
know I'm not enough.
Right. No
Doesn't
one
matter how
is.
smart someone says I am like or how smart I think I am.
Hmm.
None of that matters. I understand because I understand the dialectic in my head. I understand that, oh, if I keep doing this with other people, I
Hmm.
can keep having these things. And I can do, like even if the sparks even if it only sparks for me in my head, the conversation was worth it for me. I
Totally.
hope the conversation sparks something for somebody else's
It
head.
absolutely it
But the
does. Yeah. And that's why I started
yeah.
this podcast really was because I was like, I was tired of looking at people and seeing people as abstractions really through
Mm,
social media and COVID. I mean, I'm a pretty social person, pretty extroverted
yeah.
person, and I would be having these conversations with, um, if I was at a show or, just having a drink at the bar after work or something like that, and I was talking with a friend of mine and what kind of really what I was just reflecting on before I decided to do this was nobody I know, whether or not you would consider them right or left or whatever, has opinions that are easily boxed into these kind of myopic pigeonholes that we kind of force people into these days based on
Yeah.
politics and culture. And what we're missing out on is an entire conversation that could be happening, and things that I may disagree with or you may disagree with, but moving the needle forward a little bit, because a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. I mean, that's cliche, but it's really true. Like,
Hmm.
I do think we have a serious problem with how people communicate and deal with each other in this country. I don't see it
Oh
getting
yeah,
better unless we do this kind of thing.
for sure, for sure. During my brief time at USF Law, I mean, I'm a lifelong liberal.
Hmm.
I am I'm way too empathetic. I'm less conscientious than I am open. Like, I'm too set up
Hmm.
for being just too liberal.
Hmm.
But when I was at USF Law, I actually restarted the Federalist Society because it had shut down. Because I fundamentally believed that you couldn't have a law school without both the Federalist Society and the Constitutional Law Society,
Hmm.
which both kind of served as the
Check and
conservative
balance.
versus the liberal viewpoint on the law.
Totally.
But and I don't even really like the majority of what most of modern politics talks about, even with the words liberal or conservative,
It
because
means nothing, really.
yeah, I like with Sagar and Jetty, I don't understand what conservatives are conserving anymore.
Right.
And I
Right.
don't understand what liberals are trying to protect with their authoritarian bullshit.
Right.
So both
Yeah.
sides are just blowing my mind with their incompetence
Totally.
at their basic job.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so there's I feel incredibly lucky. I went to St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico for my undergrad.
Hmm. What
Um,
did you
one of
study?
So St. John's College only offers one program.
Uh-huh.
There's two campuses, one in Annapolis, one in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Um, uh, Everyone that goes there takes the same program. You don't get to pick your major or your classes. Um, there's about 100. It's about 400 students at either campus, and it's about 100 students in the freshman class, maybe a little more.
Hmm.
Um, everyone that goes there takes the same thing. You do, and these are all at the same time. So you do 4 years history of philosophy, religion, and literature, and that's the main class.
Hmm.
And then you do 4 years history of mathematics, 3 years history of science, 2 years history of music, just for the first two. Um, you skip science your sophomore year. Um, and 4 years of language, ancient Greek and classical French. So you do 2 years of ancient Greek for the first 2 years, and then 2 years of classical French for the second two. So the entire freshman year in the one class you're reading the Iliad, the Odyssey, a bunch of Plato dialogues, Aristotle.
Hmm.
Then in your math class you're reading Euclid's Elements. In science class you're reading Archimedes. In music class you're learning to sing Gregorian chant.
Hmm.
And in the language class you're learning to read ancient Greek.
Wow.
You're doing all of that at the same time. If you have a question, or after the seminar classes, which is that first program I talked about, which only has two classes a week, Monday, Thursday, 7:30 to 9:30 at night.
Hmm.
It's so nice to have a class then, because you've gotten enough time to like read, eat dinner, finish
Right.
all your prep work before
And
that
if
class.
it's a seminar class, it's
Yeah,
yeah.
these are all seminar classes.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the entire schooling program is all, we don't call them professors, we call them tutors. There's
Very
either one or
cool.
two. They sit at the end of the table.
Discussion,
Um,
sort of Socratic dialogue
yeah,
based.
they open it, and then it's sort of it's a discussion between the people.
That's
And
awesome.
the entire program is designed off of, it's all great books. So you're never reading a textbook or anything like that. If you're learning calculus, you're reading Newton.
Hmm.
It's all original works. So, but the key thing about this is the idea that it's not it's not the actual program that teaches you.
Hmm.
I mean, the program will teach you a bunch of things, but it's interacting with the program that will teach you everything.
Right. Okay.
Because they've designed a program that no one can accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
No one, like one kid I know got a perfect GPA
Mm-hmm.
when he graduated. He happened to be the son of a tutor that taught there, but I mean, the kid literally, I mean, genius,
Mm-hmm.
smart kid, super insightful, cares a lot. But you read War and Peace before you're over summer break before coming back for senior year, and you cover that in 2 seminars. So that's
Mm-hmm.
4 hours, and you're on to the next book.
Wow.
They don't care
Yeah.
at all. You're a pissy little 18-year-old. We didn't let you pick your major for a reason. We didn't let you pick your classes for a reason. You
Right.
don't know anything. Try this. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard. All
Mm-hmm.
of it's hard, but these are the greatest writers to ever put pen to paper. You are going to encounter something in one of these books that is going to terrify you or give you the ultimate question that you need for that point in your life.
Right.
And we're going to run you through all of this at a rate that allows you to pick it up and play with it, but not master it, because we're moving on to the next thing.
And I think the Socratic. Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
Finish
Oh,
your thought.
so this one other thing that's on that. You get out of that seminar, it's 9:30 at night. Your head is literally buzzing. You've
Mm-hmm.
had a 2-hour amazing conversation.
Right.
You immediately then go to the coffee shop where there are sophomores, juniors, and seniors who all have read that,
Creates community.
and then who have all taken at least a certain other step. So you, in talking with them, are unlocking ideas for them,
Mm-hmm.
because in the great classics, it when you actually look at it, at least from my perspective, it does work like a conversation.
Right.
These aren't
Absolutely.
People try to make all of these individual philosophies their entire own worlds.
Mm-hmm.
The entire thing works more like a conversation through
It's a
time.
story. It really
Yeah.
is. I mean, I took a narrative poetry class. I'm an English major, and
Okay.
I'm graduating this May, um, and I go to a state school in California, and I mean, this narrative poetry class is one. It's the hardest English class you could take, because you're reading. I mean, we read the Iliad, the Aeneid, we read the Odyssey, we read, oh man, the Dante's Inferno. We read, I mean, it just all the
Yeah.
classics in a row, very very quickly. And yeah, that class had a profound impact on me, because really too, the way it was structured is, and I guess, people will kind of, especially in this day and age, will kind of make the, oh well, these are like Western like texts or something like that, like you're missing out. And I mean, you can't, the reality is you can't read every amazing book on planet Earth. I mean, there are amazing Chinese authors and authors from the continent of Africa who touch along these topics too. But in terms of kind of telling this one cohesive story, in relating that to moral philosophy, these books do a really good job too, an amazing job.
Yeah.
And it was a similar situation, because it's really sparked a conversation in the class, which I thought was so cool. It was very interactive, because
Yeah.
these are foundational stories to, I mean, you can watch a Disney movie and pick these things out, anything really.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
And I want to add to something you said, because I really think people should branch out and read the great works from other cultures.
totally.
The one thing I will say, which is back particular to education, just for the idea of education, is that St. John's only offers the Western classics program for the undergrad.
Hmm.
They have an Eastern and a Western classics program for
Okay.
for master's programs. Um, I The Western classics program is like a boiled down undergrad program.
Hmm.
Th those guys actually come to us for help with their homework. It's
Right.
hilarious. And the Eastern classics is like the same rate of as the Western classics one.
Hmm.
So it's good, but it's not as hardcore as the undergrad program
Right.
is. But but what that idea just there is, because if you're learning this and you're there at that college, you
Hmm.
probably you are learning about the Western perspective.
Hmm.
Probably because you are in some way a Westerner,
Hmm.
and you should learn about the perspective that built the world that you live in.
Absolutely.
Then, if you're careful, and this is this is one of the things that annoys me about philosophy in this regard. I think you have to be careful and to really work from the bottom of the structure and really reread Eastern classics the way that I think I read the Western classics,
Hmm.
to sort of understand the conversations that happen through the writers on that side.
Hmm.
But sure, you can just go read and dabble. But the hard part is just being a Westerner and then just picking up the Tao Te Ching and just being like, oh,
I want to
I
tell
under.
I have an experience with something similar because I mean I've always loved to read, and so I read the Analects by Confucius
Mm,
after reading Plato's Republic. So
okay.
I was like, okay, yeah, let's just, I'm kind of imagining in my head all the great philosophers. Let's try and go through it. And I mean, this was after I was in my 20s, so I had a decent, I guess you could say, like I was educated enough on like just through school and stuff on like what you were saying, these sort of foundational Western texts, or at least I had a
Yeah.
familiarity with the themes and stuff. But
Mhm.
um, I could not for the life of me make sense of the Analects because, and then this is kind of what I was getting to with, there's only so many books, and one of the reasons why, as a like you said, as a Westerner, as someone who has I mean is our country is kind of structured off of Enlightenment thinking, which is structured off of, I mean, the list
Yeah.
goes, it goes down to that
Yeah.
level. It makes it was a lot easier to contextualize where I'm at in this society as an American through those Western texts, and it was really fascinating reading the Analects. But um, it's a completely different culture. The way everything is different. I mean, they're human beings, they feel the same emotion as I do,
Yeah.
and they have families and all this, but the history of China is something people dedicate their entire lives to studying. I mean, I
Mhm.
couldn't wrap my mind around. Also too, I mean, there was a lot of great wisdom in that book, but just things that we would look at and assume based on kind of this current dialogue that's happening is like like you could problematize the Western text because they're old white guys or something, but the amount of like kind of outward like misogyny and bigotry in this ancient Chinese, I mean, you take it for what it is at the time, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
amazing moral lessons, but again, it was really hard for me to understand fully.
Yeah. I really can't take anybody seriously who wants to talk about like ancient white men.
I know, it doesn't make any
Um,
sense to me.
though, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the Western classics, the great philosophers, the great writers, these people, which includes many women, just
Hmm.
not that many
Right.
for historical, economic, and other reasons.
Social reasons.
Yeah, social
Yeah.
reasons mainly. Those those writers wrote better than their genitalia. They wrote
Absolutely.
better than they could be defined by the genitalia. These things
Right.
encompass more truths than exist in the gendered human being.
Right.
So there's no reason to think about them like that,
Right.
like
It's the most,
whatsoever.
it's like the most, and this, I mean, we could go down this sort of road for a minute or not, whatever. I mean, it's an endless conversation, but I find it to be the most simplistic form of thinking humanly possible. I find it almost like, to me, it almost is like a mental illness to think that just because someone has, whatever's between someone's legs, doesn't mean that they're incapable. They're that means they're incapable of having an opinion that is related to the human condition, or having some insight that's related to our overall human condition. It's incredibly frustrating, as if these people, again too, I mean, we're imagining, and I think based on our mutual interest in Eric Weinstein, I know he's kind of touched on this, but we're at this point now where everything is so good that we have to kind of create new problems. And part of this too is because things like, people often forget that throughout most of human history, and I'm just making a factual statement, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but the spheres of male and female have been pretty separated in every
Mhm.
culture for the most part. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, definitely, um, but to think that somehow we should go back and look at like Plato's Republic and just look at it through like a a kind of critical theory sort of lens or something like that, and miss
Yeah.
all of the moral, miss all of um, the really important philosophy and all that stuff. It just seems like it's like, why are we wasting our time doing that?
Yeah, yeah, it really is unfortunate. And I
Hmm.
mean, St. John's College isn't even immune to it.
Right.
Um, and obviously it shouldn't be, because it's a place where, I mean, some of the kids going in there are just, some of the kids go in there just like Sartre,
Hmm.
and some of the kids going in there have never read philosophy before.
Right.
But like, of the people that that school can kind of attract, yeah, I mean, there could all sorts of things. There's been some interesting conversations I've had there with, with students saying that, this entire program is patriarchal and racist, and friends of mine saying this about the program, and I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. Like, I understand what you're trying to say,
And there
but
might be
I
aspects of real truth to it too, but
sure,
but
but
but overall, right.
if we actually had this conversation, you'd have to understand that some of the greatest physicists in the world were Nazis.
Right.
Like,
Well,
you're not going to escape the fact that some of the greatest people in the world, and some of these people, like, you
that's what
can't
it
hide
means.
this stuff. So
It
yeah.
means being a human being means carrying around. I'm not absolutely not a perfect person, and I'm friends with people, and I've got family who people do things that are, um, I mean, we are not, like, we exist on a spectrum. We do good things, we do terrible things, we change. Um,
Yeah.
that people, I don't think that people are set in
Yeah.
stone,
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I mean, the on the education front and in the
mhm,
set in stone front, I think people should look at the example from the Mino,
mhm,
for well, one understanding of education, but not the literal one that Socrates talks about, because I don't like that one. The idea
yeah,
of remembering something from your eternal soul,
right,
that's
right,
just stuff that you should, like, if you want to understand how existentialism differs from essentialism, there's a beautiful point.
mhm,
Because if you understand the idea that either you take a soul and then you have the
mhm,
blip in the middle where that's your life, you
right,
know,
yeah,
and your soul's eternal. There's the blip in the middle where you have to, like, remember stuff, because in order to live a life, you had to give up the perfect knowledge or whatever.
mhm,
And that's Socrates' idea for this, and that's like, so in the beginning, Meno asked Socrates, can virtue be taught? And Socrates asked, well, that depends on what you mean by teaching and what you mean by virtue.
mhm,
And eventually, when they get on to the discussion of what they mean by teaching, Socrates and Meno wander onto a slave doing something in the sand, and Socrates asks the slave to, given a square, um, in the sand that he draws, and giving the tools of geometry, which are straight edges and compasses,
mhm,
to draw uh, a square of half the area.
mhm,
And the slave tries to draw it through the middle as just like a cross, and then Socrates is like, no, those are squares a quarter the area, and all this stuff.
mhm,
And then eventually Socrates gives him a hint, and then the slave remembers, and then basically finds the midpoint of each of the four lines of the square, draws the diagonal lines to collect them together to form a diamond in the middle, and that square is half the area.
hmm,
And Socrates points out to Meno that I didn't show him how to do it. I didn't give him the information, and you didn't. He didn't get it from, like, he had to have remembered it from somewhere. That was that moment of like, oh, I
right,
understand it now.
right,
And so Socrates tries to use this remembrance. But I think the more important thing to learn about education from that is that what Socrates has to do is the slave, even though he's a slave,
mhm,
thinks he can answer the question correctly 3 times, and he
right,
fails all 3 times. He's like,
right,
try
right,
this. It's like, no. It wasn't until he admitted to Socrates, I don't know. I
right,
thought I knew, I didn't know. it wasn't until you admit that you don't know something that you actually are in the position to learn.
Absolutely.
And this is
Yes.
this dual side of this coin that we're
Hmm.
running up against in this conversation, right? Because
Right.
there's the need to be perfect, to like, I
Hmm.
can be the thing, I can do the job, I'm better, I'm not, because I'm not anything that's below the surface. I'm not going to think about all of the things I would do if I had to. I'm
Hmm.
just going to think about the things that I want to do, not
Right.
the things that I am willing to do if it really took me to do it.
Right.
So by rejecting the root, the darkness, the sort of, by rejecting the Jungian shadow,
Hmm.
you get this false idea where it's just like, ah, la la la, everything is
Right.
light, why are you being a bad person, like, I don't need to change, I'm a good person. And then
Yeah.
you lose the fundamental, if you don't have the idea of the dialectic,
Hmm.
of the thing that, like, of the thing within your, of the ability to have the dialectic of change within yourself,
Hmm.
and you're just the one monopole happicness, I'm good because I am this way and therefore I don't have to think about my
Right. You're a
actions.
caricature in that point almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're caricaturing a human being, and I get it. It's
Hmm.
just that it's like, well, and, with no response, with no responsible adults in the room, it's hard to figure out who we are supposed to model.
Yes.
Yeah, through a personal note, my parents are relatively old,
Hmm.
so I think there's a Peterson-esque thing that he talks about, which has to do with like the lineup between God, Superman, and your father.
Hmm.
And then there's a point in your life where you realize they're not the same person. And then
Right.
your point in the life where you realize they're nowhere close.
That's
And so,
that's an important moment for people because I had that with my parents too, where I go, oh my God, um, okay, you guys didn't start, and mom and dad, if you listen to this, of course I love you, but you guys didn't start saving for retirement until you're in your, late 30s, or it's this kind of like, it's this almost drug like feeling of realizing that, guess what, no one is going to pick you up at the end of the day. It's your ass, really. I mean, there are
yeah,
people that love you and people that care about you, but it's your ass on the line and you're the one that's in charge of it.
because no one has any idea what they're doing.
No. No. 100%.
And that's the thing you have to learn basically when you turn 18 is like,
Right.
yeah, the game is still there. It's just
Hmm.
that all of the people that you thought knew what game they were playing
Yeah.
are just winging it, and everyone's just winging it.
Going back
So,
to education, this would never
yeah.
happen, but I always thought this would be a good way to deal with college. Is you're not allowed to enroll in college until you're 20 years old. So you graduate from high school and you have to work for 2 years. And
Hmm.
maybe, because I really do think that maybe 3%, maybe, I mean, you could go in some situations 10%, of 18-year-olds really understand what it is they want to pursue and spend that type of money to pursue. It seems like such
Yeah.
a uh, such a strange thing that we do. And I know for myself, I graduated in 2009 and went right into community college, and then uh, I became interested. I played music and eventually I toured as a musician, which was great. And I worked as a line cook with a ton of crazy Mexican dudes who became some of my best friends. And I learned a lot about just what it means to be like working 9 hours a day, 5 days a week with people who barely speak my language. And I mean, those types of things almost did more to shape my perspective and my curiosity about what it was I actually wanted to do with my life, rather than just go from high school into college. You're essentially transporting that social system. It's like, okay, your classes. And I saw this as an adult because I went back and I'm getting my degree now at 29.
Mhm.
I see that with some of the people I have in class where, as an English major, it's kind of split, where it's most people in a state school that are English majors either want to teach or they're just getting a degree and they have no idea what they want to do. Um, and there are a lot of really brilliant people who I've met who are just they're just kind of like waiting, wading, kind of just like bogged down by this feeling that they need to get this degree to do something. And the reality is we're seniors now, that the only real option is to teach or to sell yourself,
Yeah.
and learn some other skills. It's a bit much, and I don't see that as much with people who chose to go into STEM fields. Or I mean, it's a much more process driven approach. It's like, look, you can
Yeah.
either do the math, you can either engineer this thing, or you can't. So bye, right? um,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
Yeah, no. It really is. There's all sorts of ways in which the heuristics of the not too distant past are really failing us.
Hmm.
The idea that everybody should become educated. Not everybody needs to pay for a thing called college.
Right, it's the idea
Like,
of college that people pay
yeah,
for
you
in a lot of
you
ways.
sh- you should be socialized by the time you should be as socialized as possible for each stage of your life until you're an adult.
Hmm.
That should be done through your community, your family, your blah blah blah. This we
Hmm.
shove a lot of that into school. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be there.
Hmm.
Like, but like even trying to pull out like and say, hey, like there's no reason to be paying this kind of money in a lot of these situations for this stuff, just because this is the thing that we're dealing with on the other side of here. Like, I
Hmm.
understand wanting to go learn.
Hmm.
Like, that I get. Like,
Hmm.
it's really weird because I understand, like, when I think about what I actually spent my money on for my college,
Hmm.
it's really weird because I didn't pay for textbooks. I didn't, like, the actual stuff that I paid for was the ability to have the conversation in those rooms. Like,
Hmm.
the reading list is online. These
Right.
books are all old.
Right.
There's nothing special other than getting, like, being pushed into those conversations.
Hmm.
And so, in some ways, education is the hardest thing in the world.
Right.
And you have to want to learn something, which requires, digging at least a little bit deep inside of yourself, realizing that you don't have something, and then learning how to search outside of yourself to fill in that thing,
Right.
to fix the model, or to add the thing to
And to
yourself.
understand who you are as a person too. I mean, that's um again, I think it's a slippery slope, because in high school, I mean, it's kind of paradoxical. On one level, figuring out how your brain works, like, I've always been fascinated by like the big five personality stuff and the
Mm,
Myers-Briggs stuff and all that. So I've had like a general idea, and just trying to be more mindful of like, okay, do I feel energized right now? Do I not? Why is that? I mean, I do think that some people have more of a connection to that side of themselves than others. It's not good or bad. I think it leads me to feel anxious sometimes. So there's that
mm,
aspect. But, um, it's like on one level, figuring out how you learn is so important. And I think that I mean, I am going into a master's program for education science, specifically to try and dive into ways in which people learn effectively. Because so much of, I mean, if you go into any high school class now, you'll see a lot of, I mean, I guess it depends too, but a lot of times the teacher will rely on things like crash course videos on YouTube, um,
mhm.
these kind of educational videos and even podcasts too. You're getting, and there's no, we're learning, we're at the forefront of how we can learn best for our society. And I think when you say education is the hardest thing, it really, I mean, we understand probably more about the universe in some ways than we do on how to educate a population
Yeah.
nationally effectively in a way that isn't super in the pipeline of, okay, here are national values and blah blah blah. You don't want
Mhm.
that. But
Yeah.
where's the structure? How do you structure something like that? It's hard.
Yeah, no. It is the foundational problem, because it is the tooling up of the next generation to solve the next generation's problems, and
Hmm.
you can't teach it how to solve old problems, no matter how
Right.
cost effective it is for you.
Hmm.
And at some level, education at its core can be simply modeled, because it's
Hmm.
the idea of something approximating a child
Hmm.
asking a question and interacting with the world in that question until the question becomes better,
Hmm.
in some sense, until the system gets upgraded.
Right.
Um, the amount of time we spent forcing kids to think about certain questions to the point that they don't want to be in those classrooms. Like,
Right.
I haven't met a single person that doesn't want their question answered on some level when
Hmm.
they really have a question.
Right.
But I haven't met a single person who enjoyed every minute of school, like
Right.
always enjoyed being sat in front of those classes.
Totally.
The idea that you're not in charge of
Hmm.
your mind and your time when you're in class and school
Right.
and you're thinking
Yeah.
is so destructive. Because, I mean, and I'm not saying that there's not a time for that.
Hmm.
The point of the entire model at St. John's is they never advertised.
Hmm.
If you were going to go there, you were going to find it.
Hmm.
And if you needed to go there, we hope you found it. They had a 50% graduation rate, and they still do. They
Hmm.
don't care if you don't make it through. It's
Right.
designed to be hard.
Right.
Forbes magazine ranked it like the #1 most rigorous college in the country 10 years ago or whatever. It's designed to be the most difficult and the hardest thing you've ever done in your life,
Hmm.
for an 18-year-old or for a 40-year-old.
Right.
I went to class with some people in the middle of their life, and
Hmm.
this stuff still like is as painful to them as it is to us.
Hmm.
But it like it doesn't matter how hard it is. The interaction with it changes you.
Right.
And in some way, too, I think, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, it's complex. And as I think about it too, is following along what you're saying, when you get down to, I mean, when even thinking about, it's like, right, okay, so you enter this environment of this really kind of rigorous and untraditional schooling environment, right?
Mhm.
You've got a ton of different things working at the same time. You've got a workload, you've got a ton of things to read that maybe you're uncomfortable reading or sound alien to you. Then you have the social aspect of having to, I mean, I assume when you kind of talk about how that college was structured, you guys sat in like a circle type of thing where you could see
Yeah,
each other.
essentially
Right.
just a long table. Yeah. Yep.
Totally. And what that does is that if you don't have anything to say, and if you haven't really done the work, it's obvious. There's this idea that you don't actually join a meeting until you speak. And when it's so easy to get away with not doing the work in other types of college environments, because
Yeah.
the purpose isn't to actually learn or to challenge yourself for a lot of people. I mean, I think it's subconscious that people don't realize that. They think that, okay, this is just something I have to do, or this is something that I am following in my parents' footsteps. Because the word college, yeah, it has existed for whatever,
Yeah.
thousands of years. But to even think that college now in 2021, for the most part, means the same thing as it did 60 or 70 years ago, well,
Hmm.
you better pull up all these different data points and really question that, um, because it doesn't in a lot of ways. And I think what you're saying about really how we learn to enjoy thinking as individuals within our capabilities and capacities, and how we find an interest in something that motivates us to continue pursuing that interest. Those two things are almost, that to me is the purpose of education. Like, I could, and I'm student teaching right now, but um, what I'm doing is student teaching. It's essentially we're creating. I work at this, or I'm working with this outdoor. It's an outdoor school that's kind of built around this sustainable model,
Cool.
and so it's teaching kids how to farm, how to homestead, how to build sustainable buildings that are within code.
Very cool.
Things
Yeah.
like that. And what we're doing is launching a um, like an online news journal. So the
Mhm.
incentive is, if you're part of this tract, and kids can choose, they don't have to, we don't want kids who aren't interested in that. If you would rather be getting your hands dirty, then you choose to go get your hands dirty, because otherwise you're going to be dicking around while we're trying
Yeah.
to get work done. And that's okay, because I've been that kid. Um, but the incentive from the beginning, and we had our first, it's a 15-week program, we had our first week today, is this idea that, hey, look, you are going to be out in the community immediately. We're publishing our first story next Thursday. You're going to be writing it with the other group of kids, and this is going to be shared on social media. This is going to be, people are
Yeah.
going to react to it, and they're so excited because someone's giving them a little responsibility. It's like
Yeah.
17 and 18-year-olds aren't stupid, contrary to popular belief.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're just, it's the lack of, it's a lack of kind of life accumulated wisdom. I guess you could say wisdom really is what
Yeah.
it is.
And this is peculiar to our generation. This is something that looks like a problem now, that like it's been a problem forever. But
No, it
we
hasn't.
see this version of it today because of
Right.
the helicopter parenting. There's a
Hmm.
different version of kids that you get when you have no parenting, and we
Right.
saw that in the first part of the 20th century.
Right.
So you can have like, it's just the other side. These
Hmm.
helicopter parent kids who've never like taken on real responsibility and
Right.
actually done something and accomplished something and improve something.
Hmm.
I feel so grateful for having gotten to do things. I got a black belt when I was younger and an Eagle Scout. So
Nice.
the ability to have those things, yeah, it's hard to look at the world from a perspective that really isn't your own.
Hmm.
And it really points out that, like, the student has something that they're interested in, that they're fascinated by. They have something.
Hmm.
I guarantee you that the role of a tutor or a teacher in some way,
Hmm.
more like a tutor, the role, if we're actually talking about the role or what their job is, but the role of a tutor in some way is to be able to take the questions and the fascinations that somebody has
Hmm.
and show them how learning something from every aspect of the world improves their ability to answer that question.
Right. And it leads to, and again, I think this, you could get into critiques of sort of like modern American society in some ways, but this idea that people kind of have a myopic view of what learning, and like, people usually, their motivation for going to school is to make money.
Mhm.
So what ends up happening to a lot of people is you get a degree in something, or you learn a skill that will get you some sort of money if you're lucky. If you're in the humanities, you probably won't. But um, and then you're kind of left going, okay, well, life is a lot more about what are you going to do with your big paycheck if you're working 50 hours a week at a job you don't enjoy? I mean, that's going to wear you down really long term. I think that there needs to be a more kind of holistic approach and go, okay, well,
Mhm.
what is something that you could do? What is something you're interested in? Right? Like for me, coming out of my 20s, or coming out of high school, it was music. Like I played music, I wanted to play in bands. I kind of had this delusion that I could be, not a delusion, but it was something I needed to learn
Yeah.
about the way that the actual industry works.
Mm.
Um, and I don't regret any of it, even though I didn't really start getting my shit together until I was in my mid 20s. Um, but what it did, that whole process showed me, was that there is something that I need in my life, which I need a creative outlet no matter what. If I would have gone straight to college, I might not have recognized that.
Mhm.
And I need to be around people who sort of think creatively in similar ways because that inspires me. It keeps
Yeah,
me energized.
totally. Yeah.
But there's like this there's, I guess in Japanese culture, I think it's called ikigai, which is this idea that you have your life is balanced, your life is complete more or less when you balance your social, your
The
yeah
four parts, right?
yep, and
Yeah.
I forget totally what they are. You might remember them, but
I think one of them is the thing that provides you money, the thing that provides you meaning, the things that,
mhm,
and it's not just meaning, meaning for yourself, meaning from your community, and it
right,
has to do with like, yeah, attempting to complete the whole. What is the
right,
thing that you do that completes the whole picture for you?
right, and maybe that idea is a little bit uh I don't want to say like not self-helpy. I think maybe human beings are a little bit more complex than that, but I think it's a good place to start, in terms of
It's a powerful, like, totally like total model. It doesn't.
it makes
It's not
sense
going
to
to give
people
you
when they see
add-on
it.
pieces. Yeah,
Totally. But
it's not
when
going to
pretty
give you a
much
bunch of
everyone,
playful. But yeah, you can look at it and go, I think you
oh,
can
that
learn
makes
from it.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, really, it's like, how do we, um, and again, I mean, the problem really with education, the way I look at it is it's sort of like, it's trying to climb Mount Everest without any legs and no Sherpa to help carry you up. It's just impossible to deal with at this level because the incentives are, and everything is driven by, in a large part, the government. And so it's like, where do we start in that? I mean, that's why I'm so stoked to be doing this program. It's because it's outside of like the kind of normal apparatus of education, but implementing things like that on a large scale or in communities that don't have, like these native communities we were talking about at the beginning, it's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just curious about your perspective relating to like what kind of alternatives do you see to um, the sort of like public school framework that we've all sort of been inundated with and indoctrinated by.
Mhm. Well, for starters, I think that program really sounds amazing.
Hmm.
I mean, I grew up in the outdoors a lot here up in Alaska. I mean, I started in Cub Scouts as a Tiger, and then made it all the way to Eagle, so I did the entire thing.
Nice.
Um, even Santa Fe. So one of the peculiar things about Santa Fe and the colleges is that it, it's a quite a heady place.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of partying. I mean, it's a wild place. I mean, it's philosophy students. These kids are asking questions on the edge of reality, and they really
Right.
like to go there.
Kind of live at the edge of reality too.
Yeah, and they really do. But
Yeah.
and so um, to on some, I mean, they they have. I mean, so it can be weird. They have fun, but it's weird. The gym is a place that not that you won't find most Johnnies going to the gym. Sorry,
Hmm.
we call people who went to St. John's College Johnnies.
Johnny's.
Yeah, you won't find that many. I mean, it's changed nowadays a little bit,
Hmm.
but it really was a different place, especially a while ago. Like it was a place where there'd be ashtrays in all the classrooms, and the people just sitting there reading the books, smoking
Yeah, yeah,
cigarettes. It was,
yeah.
I mean,
Bohemian.
yeah, it had a thing to it, but there's this idea that even philosophers get stuck in, which is that their body is a vessel for their to carry their mind around,
Hmm.
and if that's another breaking of one of these two-part system that really just throws the baby out with the bathwater, and really you can destroy your body just by
Hmm.
thinking like that for not very long if you're not
Totally.
careful.
Right.
And so the idea that education, like we've talked a little bit about some of the things that have been with us forever for the most part with our education, socializing and all that stuff. All
Hmm.
that stuff should happen.
Hmm.
But education should really be about getting those students in new and unique experiences where they're interacting with the world and the environment around them.
Hmm.
And getting like there is no reason to be in a classroom every day.
No.
There is no reason to do the majority of what we do, especially when it comes to just the goal of education,
Right.
of just getting students to become lifelong learners, which is providing them with the tools for really understanding how to work the machine in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Really giving them the, hey, we're going to work with you through your childhood, so
Right.
that at some point you can get this stuff, you can answer this for yourself, instead of this system that just pumps out these just half-baked kids that have to go learn how to write an English sentence,
Right.
because they made it to college, and the
Mm-hmm.
college professor is like, this, like, most of my students can't write a real paper.
Right. Well,
um
and it's
yeah,
and something that that gets beat to death, but it's very true is this like trope that like, oh well, when am I going to need to use this in the real world? And it's true in a lot of sense where it's I'm math is hard for me. I'm
mm,
much more verbally inclined. I mean, that's kind of one area that I am proficient in, and you know, I've learned to do math as I've needed to. When I have
yeah,
to, when I'm confronted with, it's like my day job, I'm a bartender. So I have to do math every day. Very simple math, but I have to do math. I have to balance my books. I feel confident that I could learn how to do certain types of math as it relates to what I get into in life. But being in a math class as a teenager was a nightmare for me because I didn't understand the concepts. And once you lose the first or second concept, you
yeah,
can't, and the teacher is unwilling, or and this is something I want to touch on too and get your take on, because
totally.
um once you're behind, you're behind. And once you've kind of got, if you're 16 and like I was, you kind of just have this like mentality of like, fuck it, I'm not going to try, I'm going to copy, I'm going to do what I can to get through. um and so I didn't learn much in my math classes. And something too that I kind of going into this is, I don't want to blame the teachers for it, but they had large classes and a lot of kids. And at the end of the day, they just didn't have the energy or stamina. And we were inside. I mean, you're a boy going through puberty at 15 or 16 years old. You don't want to be stuck in a class all day. Like, how
The,
much I just, it's frustrating that the environment of teaching and the types of people that become teachers they never seem to be factors in that. People look at test results and they don't ever think, oh wow, well maybe if our standardized testing was really, we gave kids a chance to run around or do this, or we had different teachers, maybe that would go up. It's never that.
yeah, no, they're, because of the kinds of questions that system asks, they are never going to be able to solve the real problems.
Hmm.
Their questions don't actually allow for them to even go in the right direction. So it's sort of like, the journey of 1,000 steps, of 1,000 miles does start with a single step, but that does actually need to be in the right direction,
Hmm.
and they don't know how to do that. So
No.
one of the biggest problems here is that we invented a thing called teenagers.
Right.
Then we said, also go sit in a classroom and get educated because we're not ready for you yet. And
Yeah.
so there are multiple things going on here.
Hmm.
The workplace now requires more education. So you need to be slightly older.
Right.
We have far fewer labor jobs. So
Hmm.
we need fewer young males,
Right.
to go die in machine shops,
Totally.
you know,
the
yeah.
young the young males
In
that.
case, yeah,
Yeah.
if you want to go look up something, go look up ironwork accidents in China. Just
Okay,
go look up.
I'm writing it down right now.
This isn't a good thing to go look up, but
Well, I've
but
I've
the
spent my fair share of time on live leak and stuff. So
the idea that you can work with hot iron in such unsafe ways because you have so many humans, that the
right.
price of labor is so cheap, it does really say something.
Mhm.
So the system, like, if we're talking about systems of pressures that are selecting for these things,
Mhm.
it really is something terrible, where just on the other side of this is essentially, so one of the things that really gets me, so when I was a substitute teacher,
Mhm.
math, science were like my favorite subjects for substitute teaching. I would my favorite things to substitute teach were like AP Calc or AP Stats, maybe AP Chem, um, but a couple of times I got to sub for a teacher that had a pretty broad range of classes. So she
Hmm.
had an algebra like 1 or AB retake class,
Hmm.
and then she had a pre-calc class. And the pre-calc class had a lot of smart students and a lot of students who really knew how to use Wolfram Alpha and really didn't understand the mathematics that they were claiming
Hmm.
to. But one of the things I found the most interesting was one of the algebraic classes where um, maybe 8 students in the total class, all of them too old for being in this math. All suffer like a couple. Those that weren't too old basically spoke no English.
Hmm.
And so I would have to translate into Spanish to even just help them with some stuff. But the hardest part was there were it was basically just 6 black students.
Hmm.
Now, I should say Anchorage is a very diverse. I mean, you know this.
Yeah.
The Anchorage school system is very diverse.
Right.
We have the most diverse elementary, middle schools, and high schools in the
Also,
country.
should be noted too for people that are listening are going to listen. Like something that always shocks people is saying, "Yeah, I had a lot of like I knew a lot of Japanese kids when I lived in Anchorage. I knew a lot of
Yeah.
Asian kids when I lived in Anchorage." I mean, it really is a melting pot.
Oh, for sure, for sure,
Hmm.
for sure, for sure. I lots of people as I've been to other parts of the country, I've been like, well, where are the Asian supermarkets?
Right. Yeah.
And they're
Exactly.
like, and I'm just like, I grew up in
Where can I get
Anchorage,
that? Where can I get those
where all
weird
the Asian
ingredients?
supermarkets are. Yeah, Anchorage has wonderful Asian supermarkets, and they're
Yeah.
all over because we have a thriving essentially population because you can reach an amazing part of the globe actually
Hmm.
within about 7 hours of flight from Anchorage. So, which is why FedEx here. Anyway, which is why I'm here. Anyway, I'm here because FedEx is here. Um,
Boom.
because my dad used to fly. Anyway,
Gotcha.
so the these students, I mean, the idea that you laugh and snicker at each other when you make a mistake, when I'm trying to help one person, or like the idea that you're so focused on somebody else. At its core, that's part of it, right?
Hmm.
Why are you listening to me help somebody else do math, like help this person on their math thing? You should be finishing your thing. I had different problems when I was in middle school with math. I would I would not do my homework, open up at the very start of class, open up the book, write down the 15 answers from the back, open up the book, and before I had to turn in my math homework from that day, I would go through and do the other 15 questions.
Yep.
And just as like fast as I could. I've always
Hmm.
loved math, so I'd be like, and done, never doing my homework ever. Just like I would just
That's
keep
funny.
doing that every day. She would watch me. The teacher would watch because we would all know that we'd be turning in the homework in 5 minutes, and I would just
Right.
get it done. Like yes.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, and I never cared about what anybody else was doing. But
Hmm.
as soon as I was done, I was going to be the class clown.
Right.
So, but there's something painful at the bottom of that, which is there's a lot of painful lessons to be learned about the ability for human beings to find a little bit, to dig at each other when they're all down in the bottom of this same hole. You're all in the same pit. You're all in the same retake class.
Hmm.
You shouldn't be laughing at each other. You
Right.
should be helping and caring about each other because I care
Right.
about you guys.
Right.
But the power, the social structure that gets built up by the time you get to high school,
Hmm.
that to me is the reason that I get on a thing about the mix of socializing in school.
Hmm.
Because we socialize them in school, the rules are go to the teacher, or like the teacher handles things. The kids aren't handling things.
Hmm.
It should be about, and this ties into one of the things that I think you pointed out, which is probably one of the most important things that we don't talk about, which is the power of older generations. It used to be way easier as a child in older generations to figure out who you were
Hmm.
because you could find a quiet place.
Right.
Now, even if you can find a quiet place, I guarantee you have your phone with you,
Right.
which means you're not figuring out who you are. You're
Hmm.
figuring out who you are in relation to everybody
Who you
else.
think you are, who you want to
Yeah.
be. You're being confronted with a lot of, I mean, God forbid you, it's like if you're, and it just happens. I mean, there are really unattractive people. And if you're a kid growing up and you're an unattractive person, or you have some flawed or perceived flaw in yourself, think about what social media does. I mean, I'm not familiar. I'm not sure if you've read The Coddling of the American Mind.
Yeah, yeah.
One of my favorite books. Nice, nice. Yeah, I've gifted it to so many people. But
Oh, yeah, I've given that one away a couple times. That
the,
one's, yeah.
the data that just shows how, I mean, like teenage suicide rates are spiking at an insane rate. And it does, I mean, the socialization, like what you're saying, is really in an in-person, it's a type of like dance that we have to do as human beings. It's not always clean. It can be awkward, it can be clumsy, but it's getting to know you like we're doing right now. It's like I
Yeah.
haven't had this conversation with you before. We're just doing it on the spot. It's fun. But and that's kind of goes back to my point of before you go off to college, having to interact, having to get a job or do something that forces you to interact and deal with people on a level of, it was a long time before I ever had a relationship with like, I had my friends and I had people at school, but when I started working, I had friends at work that also depended on me to do my job. I
Yeah.
had friends, and working as a line cook, which is, I mean, everyone is usually on some sort of drug, or I mean,
Yep.
it's a fast paced and kind of shitty job, but a good one. I'm grateful I had it. But I had friends that I worked with who would come in so hungover that they couldn't work, and I would just have to be like, dude, you have got to either get the fuck out of this room right now and go home so I can deal with this and get someone in, or you've got to get it together. And that type of socialization where you're actually depending on each other for something or for learning, I mean,
Yeah.
it's school, it's like the higher, and I mean, you can look at people that you went to high school with, and people change so much after high school, like I've
Mm.
I've I've had interactions with people like that I thought were like very, like big assholes in high school, and we've actually sat down, or I saw them at a bar or whatever, and we are talking, and it's like we totally hash it out. It's like, hey, this is who I was in high school. Like I'm different now. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is there's a type of socialization that happens in high school that's based purely on uh, factors in your life that will not matter at some point for the most part.
Yeah.
And the socialization that happens when you're an adult is much different. It's about establishing relationships that are, I mean, I don't care who anyone is in high school as an adult. I don't care. I'm interested in who
Yeah.
you are now, and what our relationship can bring forth into the world. Um,
Totally. Yeah, no, 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 and you're totally right there because the socializing in the school fails in a certain way. You
mhm.
have to re-socialize yourself in a workforce. That's
Yeah,
like that's a problem of the way this is working. Because
totally.
when I was thinking about when I think about socializing in that way, I really only think about the good one,
Hmm.
the one that should happen.
Right.
And then there's all of these little bits of it that we pick up in these various things that we partake in as children and then growing up that sort of give us this thing where you know it pushes us in this direction through high school where you know we could relate to some with people around us and then become exactly like one of those 12 people, or we could be pushed from all the groups and become like none of them while really becoming exactly like them. So
Right.
it's not like it's a real difference.
Hmm.
It's just you can get pushed, but the problem is that neither of those are real because
Right.
neither of them were
It's
honest to what you were. They were just your
totally,
reaction to the rest of the world.
absolutely, which matters in high school because and something, again, I'm going to go back to this program for a second, but these kids, I mean, generally, like I'm in a pretty liberal area of California up in the woods, and all these kids are probably, I would say, share similar political beliefs, but they're all very different too in some ways. And um like they're all kind of like hippie-ish kid. I mean, they're open enough to try out this program.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the actual, um, when it comes to actually, like, let's say, building or, timber framing something, it's like they have to work together and make sure the other person is like holding the square right and making sure the joist is set correctly.
Yeah.
And these type of things build even the kids that are, because of course there's always going to be, I mean, they're teenagers, they're awkward, they're funny and goofy. There's always going to be some sort of like level of that in some degree, but they're all, I mean, I've
Yeah.
never been around a group of 20 or so kids who just gets it and can work together like that. And I think it's because they
Yeah.
can actually see, it's like they're learning math in the process of building things that they can see and use with their hands. I just think it's like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a, anyway.
Yeah, no. The ability for somebody to like actually like if we're talking about learning and we're
Mm-hmm.
really mean learning instead of downloading, which is really what it looks like, the way that when most people describe to me at least,
Mm-hmm.
is it's not really learning. It's just like you didn't have those facts and now you claim to have those facts.
Right.
It's not like I could put you in a situation and you could sort of through careful questioning understand what was around you. You would have to go somewhere and ask somebody the questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that like no all well yeah none of the you're never going to get a group of perfect kids, but in that interaction hopefully those kids will come closer together, especially when it's not a social thing. If it's actually solving a problem, if it
Mm-hmm.
takes all of them to come together to solve one problem,
Mm-hmm.
that's the ultimate, because then everybody will have effectively been forced to at least learn something.
And
But
it even mitigates problems in the dynamics of teenagers, where it's like if you're trying to impress some girl in your class who is working on this project of building this thing with you, are you going to goof off like you would normally, or try and, I mean, I think it comes down to that level in some way too, where it's like, oh
yeah,
yeah,
totally.
you're actually more willing to do the work when there's when there's the incentive there, you know.
and
Um,
and the test is real, right? To
yeah,
remember, and that,
yeah.
that gets back to what the idea of they used to have those Latin tests. Those used to be live in
Hmm.
front of your classmates.
Right. Oof.
So I mean, at St. John's College, there's two other things. There's the after every semester you have a dawn rag, which is a 20-minute long meeting where for the first 15 minutes your five tutors sit at the other end of the table talking about you in the third person like you're not there,
Oh
about
man.
anything that having to do with your academic career. So they're basically having a conversation amongst themselves about you. And then you
Jeez.
get 5 minutes to the end to say, yes, that's absolutely right. I'll work harder, yada, yada, yada,
Yeah.
yada, whatever you need to do. And then basically, if two of them ever say, we think you need to take some time off, they'll basically request that you take a year off. You'll have to take a year off, write a letter to get back into the school. It's a whole thing.
Wow.
There's even a special one between your sophomore and junior year called the enabling, which includes the one of the big papers that you write. Because remember, you don't take tests. Basically the only real assignments that you ever turn in are essays. So you're just
Hmm.
writing essays on your own topics.
Hmm.
So it's your essay, it's your question.
Right.
You can't just bullshit a question and turn in
There's
some
no
like,
stupid prompt.
yeah, you
Yeah.
don't get a stupid prompt from the teacher, and if the teacher thinks your question is stupid, they're going to tell you find
They're
a
gonna
better
tell
question,
you. Right.
because
Right.
clearly that's not your real question. That's just
Right.
some dumb thing that you
Man, I gotta
pulled
look.
from
I want
this.
to look more into this school. I'm very curious about it.
I highly recommend it. But and then so finally
Hmm.
you do your senior thesis, which is even more involved in a bigger paper at the end of the on the end of your senior year, and that you actually have a 45-minute oral with three tutors, which is open to the
Jeez.
public, where people come in and in theory people in the audience can even ask questions, but it's
Hmm.
just a 45-minute long oral exam on the paper that you wrote.
Hmm.
Um, and it's real, it's live,
Right.
it's and one of the things that
There's no
helps is that
faking it.
there's no faking it, and they don't need to fake it because they told you to have a question and you had a question and it was a real question, so they didn't have to like provide you a fake one.
Yeah.
So the system works with the right set of incentives to end up with you in this place where you're making those right, where you're asking the right questions and you're making those right calls.
Mm-hmm.
And the socializing of the schools means that if you don't prepare for class, it's your classmates that are telling you like, hey, where were you today, what was going on,
Right.
like, because what did we pay to go to this school for other than to sit in those classrooms? So if you don't show up, you're hurting the rest of us,
Right.
like, and if you didn't do the reading, then well, but so yeah, it having those incentives in the right structure really allows for, when the time comes, the learning to actually take place. The students to be able to be in the place, to have the tools, to ask the question, to really overcome something, to really go from one level to another.
To be comfortable. And maybe we could kind of like end on this note here too, but this idea that, really, again, it kind of comes back to that environment, and the teacher aspect is you have to be comfortable in the environment to look foolish. You have to be, thinking is not as much as we want to think that it is, thinking out loud and thinking within a group of people is a messy situation. And you're
Exactly.
and it needs to be, we need to create environments for kids to figure out who they are and how they think and what piques their interest. And yeah, I really want to dig into to St. John's, because you've sold it essentially.
I highly recommend it as a program.
That environment to me just sounds like everything that I wish I had in my in my undergraduate. Not to say that I'm totally ungrateful for my education, but I've had to definitely pursue my own interests along with it to feel like I'm getting the most out of it. But
okay. Yeah, I'm actually so lucky because that high school that I went to was actually founded by people that went to that college.
crazy.
So they had set up a high school program up here in Alaska that sort of mimicked that one.
Is that what drove you? What drove you to?
I knew which college I was going to day one of freshman year of high school.
Damn.
I applied to one college and
got in.
Got in and went there.
Nice.
Yeah, on the math note, I want to and on the math note and the looking silly, I think, or appearing, the ability to, be humble. I think there's an extreme amount, and it's not the most important math book. I mean, it might be one of the most important math books.
Yeah,
but Euclid's Elements. So this is the foundation of geometry. I mean, it really is. Before Euclid, people had been doing geometry, but what Euclid did with the elements was he decided, let's take the sort of disparate mechanics structures, and let's actually try and figure out, given a relatively short list of definitions, common notions, and postulates, can you build something great? And so there's one way in which you can read this. You can just read this book start to finish, as start with nothing and a few givens, and then eventually the goal is, if you've ever seen the Ptolemy solar system model with the various platonic solids holding the various different spherical heavenly orbs, the idea being, at the end of this book, you have the way to compare the ratios of the side lengths of all of the platonic solids to each other, given that they were all built inside of the same sphere, which is this way of saying, like, you could compare the 5 platonic solids to each other. Totally awesome.
Yeah.
But in another way, this book is so many more things than that. And because of its structure, it literally is, proposition, enunciation. Here's what I'm going to do. It's like, here's the thing I'm going to do. Here's how I'm going to set it up. Here, and here's how I'm going to prove it. Here's me setting it up. Here's me proving it.
Principles driven.
Yeah.
I just put that, I put that on the show notes, so I'll show that to people too, so they can dig into it.
Yeah. I mean, when Lincoln was running for president, he
Hmm.
picked up the book because he said he needed to become a better critical thinker.
Hmm.
This book is, at the core, it will teach you how to think. From
Read
there, you
that.
can go anywhere.
You can go
Yeah.
anywhere.
Because, and this book can teach, I mean, I have so many little lessons I have learned about education from this book.
Hmm.
But I mean, this book has, and one of them is a little thing. So one of the most famous math problems in some sense has to do with whether or not you need all five of the postulates. So he says, let the following be postulated. Postulate 1, to draw a straight line from any point to any point.
Hmm.
That is him handing you a straight edge.
Hmm.
There's your tool. You can have a
Right.
straight edge. To produce a finite straight line continuously in a straight line, here's another straight edge. Okay,
Right.
okay, okay. To describe a circle with a center and a distance. Okay, protractor, compass thingy. Okay, got it. Um, 4, that all right angles are equal to one another. Okay, buddy, you're really laying it out here. Got to
Hmm.
be clear. And then 5, that if a straight line falling on two straight lines make the interior angles on the same side less than two right angles, the two straight lines, if produced indefinitely, meet on that side on which the angles are less than the two right angles. Now that's long.
Yeah.
It's a little complicated,
Okay.
and it doesn't really fit in with the other ones, right?
Right.
But at its core, all it's saying is that if you have two lines,
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that was going to work.
Perfect. Okay, two straight lines.
Okay, I drew 3 just so we could do it.
Hmm.
These two were kind of roughly parallel. This one's obviously a little bit different.
Hmm.
But if we took the interior angles all on the same side, and we said these two are equal to one another, those two are equal to one another, then we're kind of stuck with that being all 90 degrees.
Hmm.
But this one up here, so given two lines and a line that falls on both of them, if the two interior angles on one side add up to less than two right angles,
Hmm.
then if you continue these lines, they will meet on the side on which the two angles are less than, add up to less than two right angles. So what this is saying
Interesting.
is lines that are parallel don't meet.
Uh-huh.
Lines which are almost parallel meet on the
Will meet.
side which has the less angle.
Interesting. Okay.
For 1700 years, mathematicians had thought about a geometry without that postulate,
Hmm.
but had never developed a consistent geometry without it.
Hmm.
And for 1700 years, it was basically considered impossible.
Right.
Until you get Lobachevsky and you get several people doing things, and then eventually you get two entire branches of non-Euclidean geometry, which are hyperbolic and elliptical,
Yeah.
which are based on the geometry of a guy who was Apollonius of Perga. So
Uh-huh.
here's it's based off of the ideas from 2000 years ago again of math.
Right.
Just it took almost 2000 years for them to
For us to
realize
get it.
snap. Yeah. And so the ultimate goal is then there's the version of this book where you read it and you accept the givens is true and then you work through it.
Right.
Then there's the version of the book where you attack it.
Hmm.
And you say, now that I have learned this geometry, I'm going to go beyond. And so because of that, you can then start from there and then try non-Euclidean geometry eventually. But it offers the sort of grounding right there, for me at least, as a model of education
Hmm.
in both forms. The
Right.
version where you
Encompassing.
you accept something and take it inside of yourself to work with it, and then you really challenge it to really tear away as much of it that you don't need and as much of it is fake. So
Yeah.
there's it's understanding how those two things react with each other that is key.
That is the theme of the conversation summarized in a beautiful way. I'm gonna clip that because that was very cool.
Perfect,
Um,
Joseph. It was awesome
yeah, man.
talking with you, man.
Awesome talking to you too, man. Yeah, let's do it again sometime.
We should.
Awesome.
Take care.
You too.